Welcome, children of God, loved and saved by Jesus. This is Pastor Paul Steinberg, and you found the Christ for Disciplers podcast. I was first discipled by my parents, and now I'm busy discipling my kids, as well as working with chaplains in schools and our parent organization, A City for God. And this podcast is designed to assist you disciple the next generation, whether that's your own kids, your grandkids, kids in a school, kids that you have on a team, or any kids that you somehow have some influence and leadership on. This week we're looking at Solomon building the temple. What do you know about your parents? What do you know about your grandparents? Do you know much at all? If you're American like me, we don't really know that much. Maybe we know a bunch about our parents, but I think our parents don't always tell us as much as maybe in other cultures. And certainly when it comes to our grandparents, we're often much more disconnected from our grandparents. I don't know, I'm not a historian, but I think most people throughout the history of the world lived around and with their grandparents. So they would have been around in the same spot, worked on the same farm, worked in the same spot. They would have spent time with them. Now, my kids were blessed to live with one set of grandparents for like 9 years, as we had 4 generations in the same house. That was a real blessing. But if I hadn't had that experience, I don't know how much I'd know about my wife's grandmother who lived with us, or even so much more about my own in-laws. They lived with us. How much do you know about them? Do you know any of their stories? Would you even recognize them? God, He pays attention to families. And I think sometimes as Americans, we don't think God should be that way. We think, well, everybody needs to be like independent and all by themselves, and they're who they are, and we're all separate individuals. And in one sense, that's true. Every soul is individual. God loves each individual soul. God holds each individual accountable. God sent His Son to pay for each individual's sins. He has a unique individual love with us, but yet He puts us into communities and peoples and families, and He makes crazy statements like, He's going to have love for the third and fourth generation of those who fear Him, and He's going to punishment and distress is going to come to the third and fourth generation. That we're really all interacting, that we are connected, especially to our parents and our grandparents, and to our kids and grandkids. It's a big deal. And as we prayerfully set out with our goal to disciple the children that God put into our lives, we realize that is the core of what we are to do. That is core of what we can do to influence our grandkids and our great-grandkids and our great-great-grandkids. For the account of Solomon building the temple, we see that King David passed on his kingship to Solomon. And then he also passed on the tasks. Now, David had his issues and Solomon had his issues, but they fulfilled the goal of building that temple and putting God and a building in the center of God's people. Let me read the account, and then we'll apply it to ourselves in our discipleship situation. This is from 1 Kings chapter 8. Solomon says, "My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, 'You did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord has kept the promise He made. I have succeeded David my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord promised, and I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. I have provided a place for the ark in which the covenant of the Lord that He made with our ancestors when He brought them out of Egypt.'" A couple things to notice. This is a beautiful statement and testimony by Solomon about the Lord keeping His promises, using the name the Lord, Yahweh, that personal name of God, who always keeps His promises, which is a reminder that God keeps His promises, and even from generation to generation keeps those promises in ways that we don't always understand or we don't always get. And He said that David had it set on his heart. David had it in his heart to build a temple. And maybe that's something that, you have certain tasks, you got certain things that you just have a passion for and a heart for and you want to do. And sometimes God says no. Maybe that was in your vocation. You really wanted to be something. You really wanted to own a business. You really wanted to be a pastor. You really wanted to play baseball. Something you really wanted to do. And maybe you really wanted to do it for the glory of the Lord. It was a beautiful thing on your heart. But God said, no, that's not in my plan. I'm not going to have you do it. It might be a beautiful thing. I'll get someone else to do it. And sometimes, in this circumstance, it happened through David's son, but it doesn't make any sense why David wouldn't do it. David would have been the perfect one to build the temple, but he didn't. God didn't set it up. And for you and me, it's good to have thoughts and plans on our hearts, but they aren't always the right thing for us to do. There's an old saying that man proposes and God disposes. I think it sounds better in German, but I don't even remember what that is. But I don't know if man proposes and God disposes is good in English, but God loves our plans and our thoughts and our strategies and what's on our heart to please him, but he's the one who carefully guides it and pushes it forward. And that's with our kids and with our grandkids. Because you might have a lot of plans or ideas for what you want your kids to be or become, and that's beautiful. That's a wonderful thing. But God is the one who's going to carry it out. And it may be very different. It may be right on. But you can trust God. He loves your kids, and he's got a better plan than you have. Solomon would not have been my pick. Solomon is the second child of Bathsheba. It seems like if I was God, I wouldn't want to somehow condone that relationship. Like, okay, you got him, you have a second kid. I'm not going to I let the first kid die, but am I going to have the second kid become the king? And all the infighting, all this in a public way, everybody knew this, but yet that's who God chose. That's who God chose to be king. The child through Bathsheba. God's ways just don't match my ways, and God will work through a lot of things in your family, things that maybe aren't so good, that are sinful, that are bad, and God will still choose the amazing thing. But God can change things, and he can change generations. At the center of this temple was the Ark of God. That was key. That it was a sign that God was there in his people. So the temple was a great building and all this courtyard and stuff, but it was key, a spot for the Ark of the Lord, a spot where God would let his presence be. Now, if you work with children and you want to make them to be like that temple with Christ at the middle, you want to have Christ in the center of you. You want to be that temple. You want to be that temple in your classroom where your kids know that God resides, that your children at your house know that's where God resides because God is at the center. He's at the core. That's in your personal life, in your professional life, in your ministry life. And for me, when it comes to multiple generations, I can look back. My parents, amazing believers. My mom's still alive. My dad's in heaven. Amazing, normal, humble people. They weren't pastors or teachers or people that did something great inside a congregation. They just were amazing in how they served God in their vocation and their life. I'm still trying to catch up to them and fulfill my calling as well as they fulfilled theirs. But I can go back a little bit to my grandmother Maida. She's the only grandparent I really know. The other ones all died. They all were dead before I was around. I did have my mom's mom was around for a while, but she lived far away, so I didn't get a chance to hear much of her faith or experience much of that. But my grandma Maida, she was one that was all for the Lord, but she was born in 1900, so she's not around anymore. Been gone a long time, but her love of Jesus was passed on to my dad, passed on to me. Now, Jesus is, of course, the ultimate example of taking what your Father wants and doing it, and of being blessed. His Father had a plan to save the world, and Jesus, from the eternity, was set apart to do that, and he did it perfectly. And his goal is to bring all of God's family together for every generation, so that in eternity we'll be there with our great-great-great-great-grandkids, if the world lasts that long, or with our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. Look forward to it. The Lord bless you. The Christ for Disciplers podcast is brought to you by A City for God. Please check us out at acityforgod.org and share this podcast with others by having them go to christfordisciplers.com.